get started on today's topic. So today we're going to cover launching a customer community before you think you're ready. Now, I talk to so many leaders all the time, and I obviously get a lot of visibility into what their priorities are and where they're focusing their time and attention. And I will tell you, we always navigate towards talking about customer community. And I'll tell you, it's almost one of those first things where everyone's like, no, we're just not ready. We're just not there. We don't have the budget. We don't have the resources, right? There's always some excuse. And it got me thinking, right? Because I think people are thinking about community the wrong way and therefore scared to kind of take it on as a project or an initiative. And so today we're going to talk about how do you just start somewhere? Because there's always a place to start. And it doesn't need to be this huge Herculean effort. It can be something as simple as connecting your customers to one another. So that's what we're going to talk about today, where we get started and how we go about doing this. So, you know me, I always like to just start with let's level set and just make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. But I want to be very clear. Building a customer community has nothing to do with your tech stack. This is where, like I said, the conversations I have are really interesting because it's like, oh, well, I can't afford software to go and launch a customer community, or I don't have the bandwidth or the time budget, right? Like I don't have the access to those platforms right now. It's amazing how when we talk about community, it almost automatically kind of dovetails to this conversation around technology. And I want to just be very clear. Building and facilitating customer community has nothing to do with technology. It's all about the connections, right? And so that kind of leads me to my next point here. Excuse the visual. I picked a couple of my dear friends from LinkedIn to visualize this, but community is all about connecting people. You don't need an extensive community platform to do that and be successful, right? If I facilitated an introduction between two people, I would be building a community, right? Like I would start that and facilitate that. And I really want to make sure that everyone can wrap their heads around that, right? Community is not about your technology. It's not about your tech stack. It's not about this comprehensive program that you've staffed resources and time and money against. It's about facilitating the connections and leveraging your brand and access to your customers to do just that. Now, I work in an interesting space, right? So I serve all of you, right, in the customer success community. And this is an interesting space because you're all already connecting, right? Even today is a great example of how our bootcamp facilitates connections and conversations between like-minded individuals. Well, not every industry has that already built and developed in the DNA of the people that are part of it. And so for a lot of you, you might be working with customers or professionals that are in a space that lacks community, that lacks an ongoing dialogue of best practice sharing and knowledge sharing. And so this is where you actually have an opportunity to step in and step up in a big way to be the facilitator of those connections, to be the facilitator of those conversations. And that's what we're talking about. So if you're here thinking that I'm going to teach you how to deploy some really comprehensive community platform, that's not the conversation. Of course, I don't want you to leave, but if that's what you thought it was going to be, it's not. This is all about how are we going to be able to start with what we have and where we are as companies and teams in facilitating connections with people. So let's dive in. Now, again, I hit on some of this, but I do want to talk a bit about it because I think it's important. The first thing that I always hear of when we talk about community development is that from leaders and sometimes CEOs even, right? So not even just folks in the customer success space is we don't have the money for that, right? Because again, this is where everyone's head goes to technology, right? Like, oh, we don't have money to allocate to this budget for a platform. It's crazy, but that's oftentimes where it stalls, right? You didn't even get into talking about the objective or what it is that you're trying to do and achieve together. You've put this in and you've said, hey, we want to facilitate community. We want to facilitate bringing our customers together. And almost immediately the idea is shut down because there's a fear that money is going to be required in order to make that a reality. So let's just be very clear. That's not a blocker, right? There is a ton you can do with no additional spend. Now, I won't say no money, right? Because people are money and any time you spend on anything can be quantified. And so you can allocate dollars to it. Yes. But what I'm saying is no new money needs to be spent. You can use tools that you have, you can use people that you have and do this within your current spend. So don't let money be the blocker for you. The next big thing I hear is resources. And I get this a lot, right? We don't have a dedicated person that we can staff against this, right? Community needs a facilitator who's going to drive the discussions. We need somebody who's going to seed content. We need a monitor. We need somebody who's going to respond to everything. And that's just not required. Of course, you're going to need to allocate some time to it, right? So maybe some person who wants to take lead on it and who wants to be driving it, take ownership of the initiatives, but you don't need dedicated resources to do this. You can actually do a lot with just making and facilitating a place for the conversation to happen and then letting it happen. It's going to continue organically and almost with very little needed from your team if you do it right, if you set the right expectations and invite the right people. The third thing I hear a lot of is time, right? Even if we don't allocate more money, even if we don't allocate more resources, we don't have the time to do this, right? We've already have so much on our plates. I don't have the capacity, Kristi, to take on yet one more thing. And yes, let's be honest. I'm not saying that this requires no time, but I do think if distributed well, and if you have multiple people working on this together, it can be minimal time required across the folks you involve. And I think that the most of the time you're going to spend is really just in getting things set up. And depending how big of an initiative you want to go, obviously it could take more time. But I'm going to give you a bunch of ideas of things you can facilitate. Some are really small and really easy, which would eat up almost no time at all. And so when we hear that time is the blocker, I'm here to tell you that you do have time to do something. Right? I think it's because, again, we have this grand idea of what community is, right? We're bringing thousands of people together. We have to have a place for it to go. We have to have shirts and logos and values and a monitor and all these things. And that's just not the case, right? Because again, community is not about like the scale and the size. It's about the connections, about the conversations you're facilitating. The last thing I will tell you is fear. Now, this is always a funny one to me. I get folks that tell me, well, Kristi, I don't really want my unhappy customers talking to my happy customers. And so what I tell them is, well, what if your happy customers talk to your unhappy customers? How do you feel about that? And it shifts the mindset, right? Like, yeah, oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. If my happy customers would tell my unhappy customers how happy they are and what they're doing and how they're driving value, okay, maybe that would be helpful. So we need to break away from this fear of these conversations that we believe will happen. Because let me tell you, whether or not you're building or facilitating this community, conversations about your business, about your brand are happening, whether you know it or not, whether you can see it or not. And so don't be afraid of it. This is not something fear. This is something to embrace. And if you're a company who really does care about your customers, you shouldn't be scared of hearing hard realities. You should embrace that information, right? It's the same reason why we send out surveys or we solicit feedback or we build voice of customer programs. We do all of that to learn so we can get better, right? So we can give our customers more of what they need and what they want and how they need it and how they want it. So let's not be scared of facilitating conversations. So if you're in a position right now and you want to start a community and your excuse today is money, resources, time, or fear, I am telling you, let's get out of your own way and let's start to facilitate conversations and introduce your customers to one another. So I want to talk about methods because this is an interesting one, and we've toyed around with this at ClientSuccess as well. And so we're starting a bunch of things. I will tell you, we think of these boot camps as community because folks that have attended one series have attended multiple series. Relationships and conversations start in our chat and continue other places. And so we're not thinking about our community in terms of like, oh, we have just this one place where everybody who we work with and we partner with, whether they're our clients or not, our community doesn't live someplace. Our community is the facilitation, right? And so we think that boot camps are a part of how we structure community. So I like to talk about methods because, again, you don't need a very elaborate platform. Now, listen, if you have one, I think that's super cool. I think there's a lot you can do with it. I'm sure you're probably way ahead of where many of us are. But today's conversation is about teaching you and helping guide you around using what you do have access to today without feeling like you need to take on something more. So the first thing, video, right? We're doing this right now. We're facilitating a conversation, even though it's kind of one way outside of the chat. But you can think about, how do you embrace video, whether it be a Zoom meeting or asynchronous communication, right? Like Loom or Vidyard, or there's a bunch of other video conversation platforms that I've seen out there. And so how can you facilitate conversations using video? Now, most of us probably have Zoom subscription or WebEx or something like that, or maybe you have Loom, or guess what? There's tons of free video things out there as well. So how do you think about ways that we can use video and how powerful video is? The next thing is chat. We see this being really widely adopted. In fact, some of you are probably active members in some of the customer success Slack groups. There's quite a few of those, but using chat, right? Like whether you have Slack or Teams, or if you're creating like a web chat or putting something on your website even, that's a great place to go and just facilitate conversation, that dialogue. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with Slack. I mean, everyone on my team will admittedly say, Kristi hates Slack. I do, for a multitude of reasons. But for me personally, because I can't keep up with it. But Slack is a really great, easy place to continue the conversation. If you are using Slack in your day-to-day, you can also think about just having something where it's okay, it's already part of my workflow. If there's a community there as well, I don't really have to do much, or I'm not changing my behaviors. I just really go to another channel, right, another group in Slack, and you can continue participating, right? You're not changing, you're not having to go to another environment. So I like Slack for that reason, because you think it makes it easy for people to facilitate the community conversations. Next thing is in person. Guess what? People are meeting in person again. We're all really excited about this. I mentioned earlier that I'm on my way to Austin, Texas next week. We've already got tons of people. I think we're over 100 now, people who are registered for the Austin meetup. Very exciting. But in-person events, right? And this doesn't need to be at the scale that we're thinking, right? I'm sure many of us, even as companies, we put on these massive company-wide events, right, for our customers, and they're like thousands of people, or there's industry events that we see and participate in, again, thousands of people. And it's really interesting because you don't need to be thinking that big, right? An event can be, hey, I'm inviting 5 people, we're going to go out to lunch and have a conversation. That could be your event. And that could be really successful. So think about, how do you leverage in-person connections, conversations, dialogues, whether that be events, roundtables, one-on-one meetings, whatever the case may be. But let's bring together people in person again. Email. I always just laugh because this feels like the most archaic, I guess, after or before phone, undecided. But email, right? Written communication is still not dead. We still use email every single day. And so there is a way for you to facilitate dialogues via email, right? And so how do you just, again, use something as basic as that to start groups? I've seen people just really facilitate conversations and have ongoing threads around a topic, where I've seen, and we've done this really well at some other companies. We literally had one customer who was having a challenge in their organization that was agnostic of our technology that we provided, and was eager to speak with other customers. And we knew about 3 or 4 that we thought would really participate well in helping this person solve their challenge. We facilitated an introduction on email, and literally that group never stopped. I had to remove myself from it after a while, but they literally just kept the conversation going via email. And it was wild to see how these 5 people, right? There's a person who came to us, and I think we had 4 more people, just used email and went back and forth and really just built relationships and helped solve each other's problems through one thread. And so it can happen. Phone calls. I feel like nobody likes the phone anymore. I know that, it's my preferred method. If I'm not doing video chat, where like I want to talk to somebody, I think it's better than chat or Slack or writing. But how do you use phone calls, right? And this is, again, doesn't need to be facilitating a conversation with 100 people, but heck, just even facilitating a dialogue between one-on-one, right? Like between one other person. And then social media engagement. Many, if not all of you, are probably on LinkedIn. You're probably engaging with one another. You're probably having conversations, participating in conversations on people's posts and chats and groups. Use social media, right? If your customers are already there, engage in the conversation, seed other threads, right? Continue that dialogue. So you have these methods to facilitate these connections in this conversation. And again, it's not limited to these 6. These are 6 that I use for today's conversation, but you can think about creative ways to leverage these methods of engagement and communication and conversation to really start to bring people together. Now, the last one here I want to talk about is what are some options, right? So if we're thinking about community, Kristi, where would I get started? Now, I mentioned earlier the Slack group. I like I said, I don't like Slack. That's a me thing. But you could create a private Slack community, right? And it's just about, it could be your brand. You invite your customers to join the discussion. It could be private. It's really a great way to facilitate conversations and super easy, because guess what? Most people understand Slack, they like it. And it's a great way to just, again, keep conversations going, monitor, participate, and it feels very lightweight. So if you're already paying for Slack, it's part of your company, right? You guys have Slack as a product. You can build a group off of that, right? Invite people to go and do that. Now, I will say, set rules and guidelines as you would with any community. It's important to set expectations, make sure that people know what they're there for. I've seen some of these things go sideways where they think that, oh, this is a place where I'm going to go submit all of my product requests. False. That's probably not the best way to use that. So just make sure that you've got some rules and some ways to regulate that. When we think about resources, especially for Slack groups, it doesn't need to be an internal resource. We've had some really fantastic Slack groups over my course of my career facilitated by our customers, where we were the ones who built it. We created it, lived on our kind of instance of Slack. So we owned and controlled it. But our customers were the ones that took control over it, and they were happy to do so, right? They were thrilled to be brand ambassadors and really liked owning that. It put them on it elevated their visibility within the community. And so professionally, it helped them. So there's a lot of value and upside there. So again, even as you think about resources, Slack is easy. If you think about how to set the right guidelines, make sure that everyone's getting value from it, and leverage your community to maybe even help facilitate that. Something else we've done really well is office hours. And so many of you may have also participated in Gain, Grow, Retain's office hours. This was a huge hit, especially during the pandemic, during the height of that, where folks were really eager to just stay connected, right? We went all of a sudden from meeting in person all the time to not being able to leave our homes. And their office hours, I think, brought together a lot of really fantastic individuals who were eager to continue the conversation and bring their thought leadership and their expertise and experiences to helping all of us solve and navigate challenges. Now, you can replicate that by doing the same thing with your own community, right? How do you bring folks together and maybe have, if it's every week, you say, here's the theme of what we're going to be talking about. You have somebody who's facilitating or moderating that conversation. You're planting seeds. You can do breakout groups, right? There's a ton of cool things that if you're using Zoom or some other web platform, you can really make it interactive and engaging, but really be clear on what the objective is and how to participate actively in it. So office hours is another really great avenue to leverage if you want to bring your community together. Now, what I really like about office hours is it can be product agnostic. You could be inviting your customers, but be very clear. Hey, each week we're tackling industry topics. These are things that are important to you. Make it have nothing to do with your product, right? This is about helping them be better at their jobs, right? Find value in navigating challenging situations that they're going through in their day-to-day. Now, of course, if you want to have some product integration in there, meaning that you want to talk a little bit about how your product can solve for or solution some of the challenges, be my guest. Who am I to tell you what not to do? But I would definitely say there's a healthy conversation to be had there, even if you're not even talking about your product. The next thing to think through is creating a customer advisory board or a product advisory board. Now, I talked about this, I think it was 2 or 3 bootcamp series ago, where we tackled creating a customer advisory board. But these are 2 really great options for bringing your community together. Now, a different scale and different sizes for different organizations. For some businesses, I've actually even seen that they've had a customer advisory board, which was really focused on like the industry and where it was headed and thought leadership and things like that. And then a product advisory board where these individuals were really, I think, beneficial in having conversations around the product and the direction it needed to go to best serve the industry. Now, you can have one group that tackles both, or you can break them out. So really, it depends on the objectives that you have. But either way, creating an advisory board can help you facilitate conversations with like-minded individuals who are passionate and excited about the space that they're in. Now, obviously, as a brand and a business, there is a ton of value and upside to you if you leverage it effectively. But the relationships that you're facilitating in that environment really do go a long way. I will tell you, I've had the privilege of participating in a couple different advisory boards for different products and organizations, and I met a ton of fantastic people through those cabs. Not only did I learn a ton, but I was able to meet people I wouldn't have met before who taught me a bunch of things, and we still continue those conversations through today. So just think about it, right? Again, we're thinking about this through the lens of community, not through the lens of like, what can my company get from this? It's more about what can the individuals who are participating get from it. So they're meeting new people, right? They're learning and hearing new ideas. And really it's the facilitation of those relationships long-term. Now, something else, again, we talked about this a little bit, but events, right? How do we tackle using events to facilitate community? Now, again, you don't need to be thinking about big in-person events. It could still be virtual events. They could be different scales. It could be via Zoom, 5-10 people together, making it feel like a bit of a round table. Either way, again, the purpose here and the intention is to connect these individuals around topics and conversations, right? So we're facilitating that networking. And like I said, it can be about your brand and your product, but it doesn't need to be. And in fact, I will tell you, the environments in which they're not product focused are the ones where I typically get the most value. And so think about yourself and how would you like these conversations to go, right? Do you want them to be about the products and the software that you're purchasing? Do you want it to be about the other things that you're navigating as you're connecting with your peers? So facilitating different types of events. And so be very clear, right? Do you want them to be in person? Do you want them to be virtual? So at ClientSuccess right now, we're doing a bit of a hybrid. We do these monthly customer success meetups in various cities. And so we're traveling all over, making sure that we're connecting with as much of the community as possible, but really being the facilitator of bringing these people together. Maybe some of them know each other already. Maybe they don't. Maybe they haven't seen or had conversations in a long time, and we can re-spark that conversation. But we're doing some of those in-person events. But like I said, we think about Bootcamp as a wonderful part of our community. And so this is a virtual event, right? And at a different scale and run through a different format. So not all of your events need to look and feel the same way. It's really about what is your objective and then executing it in a way that feels feasible to you. The next thing, one-on-one connections. Now, there is nothing wrong with just introducing two customers. I will tell you, I love this. I love to see what happens when it happens. It happens to me all the time where somebody is facilitating an introduction between me and someone else, and we hit it off. We have great discussions and we become lifelong friends. But it is possible to just help your customers meet one other person, right? One person who is navigating the same challenges that they are, one person who's overcome a challenge that they're trying to overcome today, right? So understand who your customers are and what conversations will serve them well. Maybe try to figure out what personalities will vibe well together as well, but facilitate one-on-one conversations, right? Think about that. That is a very low level effort thing you can do. If you have two CSMs who are like, hey, I have a customer that looks like this, and I have a customer that looks like this. Oh, wouldn't it be great? We should just facilitate a conversation if they're open to it, and hopefully they can have a dialogue and solve each other's problems. It can be as easy as that. And the last thing is facilitating speaking engagements. Now, this is a great way to allow your community, right, to have a voice and to elevate themselves personally and professionally, but to share and showcase their expertise and their experience with the community. Now, if you give it a ton of people different opportunities to speak and engage, you're going to help elevate all those different voices. And what happens is everyone who's listening, everyone who's participating is getting a sense of what that person knows and what their experience is. I will tell you, a lot of conversations and connections happen following that. Now, I'm sure many of you, maybe not yet, maybe some of you have done a ton, but if you've ever participated in speaking in an event, whether you were a panelist, whether you were a moderator, you were the keynote, you were just leading a boot camp similar to what I'm doing today, I'm sure that following that event, you got a ton of new connection requests. I'm sure at some point, right, you got a bunch of new LinkedIn, maybe a couple LinkedIn messages, or somebody reaching out to you via email or Slack or some other channel saying, oh my gosh, wow, I loved what you talked about today. I'm navigating something very similar. Would love to pick your brain and learn a little bit more trying to solve for this. That happens all the time. And I'm sure some of you are behind your screens, hopefully shaking your head and thinking back to the time where that exact thing happened. So think about, how do you, as a brand, as a business, even just help somebody in your community elevate their voice, give them that speaking opportunity, and then watch what happens and unfolds as a result of that. So speaking engagements can be another way as a low level of effort for you as a business to facilitate giving the opportunity for someone else to develop and build their community, their network. So I gave you 6 ideas. This is not it. These are not the only options. These are not the only ones. These are ones where I've seen great success with minimal levels of effort. And that's what I look for, right? Or what are the things that the low calories, I would say, low calorie things that I can do in my time, almost always, that aren't going to require a huge heavy lift. Now, of course, some things, even though they're listed here, might be more work than others. Like I will tell you, these boot camps are a lot of work for me, but there's a lot of value to the community and facilitating new conversations and really spreading information and ideas and getting people to think differently about what they're doing today. So there's a ton of value, right? So for me, the level of effort, the value, as long as the value and the impact is going to be greater than the input and that level of effort, I think you're onto something. So you can pick any of these, any variation of these, and make them your own and try to find a way to just deploy these in your business in order and effort to facilitate some initial community effort. So let's talk through, I love to give you a process breakdown. And so I've got 5 steps because I love a 5-step process to just help you think, okay, where can we get started? So the first thing, select an option, right? Again, you don't have to do all of these things. Don't try to take on too much. Pick one thing, right? When we were thinking about, okay, at ClientSuccess, what do we want to do around community? This was the first thing that I decided that I wanted to tackle and take on because I thought there would be a lot of value for our customers. And it's something that really excites me and I'm passionate about, which is kind of educating and enabling others based off of my own experiences and expertise. So select something that makes sense. Heck, you might say, you know what? Today, all we're going to do is we're going to try to connect 5 customers with 5 other customers, right? So we're going to take 10 customers and hopefully that we could pair them up and just to really start to build 10 connections, right? 5 connections, sorry, not a mathematician. 5 connections, 10 people. So that might be all you have the bandwidth for today. That might be all you want to do, and that's totally okay. Just pick something that you can get started with. The next thing is figure out, who do you want to own this? Now, many of you might also be familiar with like a RACI model, which defines who's responsible, right? And then kind of goes through all of these things. It is important for you to have an owner. Now, the owner doesn't mean that that person has to do and execute and be responsible for everything, but there needs to be somebody who can really be kind of take leadership of this initiative, right? Whether it's like, hey, great, we decided that we're going to do small community forums, we're gonna do roundtable, 10 people, we're gonna do it once a month, we're gonna try to bring together 10 different customers. Okay, who wants to take point on that? So find somebody internally who's passionate about this and who wants to own it and get that process up and running. So that is going to be the first thing that you want to figure out, right? Is who can own this. The next thing is you're going to want to communicate. What are your plans to your customers, right? You want to make sure that they understand the intentions behind what you're doing, the value that they're going to get, why are you doing this, how you're doing it, how they can participate and engage. So you want to just make sure that you're managing communications effectively. Do not blast your entire community or all your customers if you're only going to work on a small scale thing of like, hey, we're just going to do a small 10-person roundtable this quarter with 10 CEOs. Don't tell all your customers you're starting to launch this roundtable conversation that you're going to do, even if it's once a month. You're missing expectations and you're communicating to them things that they can't participate in. So make sure your communication is on point to the right people, setting the right expectations. But you want to be early about this and intentional about it because you're going to want them to participate. You're going to have to make sure that they understand how. Now, nothing happens without step 4, which is all about execution, right? I tell you this all the time. Let's go and figure out all these things we want to do. We want to communicate it. We've got this great plan, but nothing happens if you don't execute. So you've got to get started. What I will tell you, where I failed the most in my career is by trying to get it perfect every time. By nature, I feel like a bit of a perfectionist. And so I struggled with the idea of things feeling like halfway done, like half-baked. But the reality of it is doing something is better than doing nothing. Now, I'm not saying that my half-baked felt like it was garbage and useless, but like, I always wanted it to feel like I thought of everything and I counted for everything. Sometimes you can't, and sometimes you just need to move forward. And so this is me encouraging you all to get out of your own way and just try to execute something that will work as intended day 1. Because guess what? You're going to evolve, right? Your customers are going to have opinions on what worked really well, what didn't, and what they want to do. So this is a great opportunity for you to say, okay, here's what we're starting with. In 30 days, 45 days, we're going to come back. We're going to get some feedback from you all, and we're going to continue to evolve and innovate. And that's where you're going to have the time to really go and continue to build out your program. It doesn't need to be all done out the gate day one. And the last thing, which I always try to talk to you all about, is impact, right? You've got to figure out what are the appropriate KPIs that you're going to track in order to say, like, was this successful? Now, you're going to have to figure out what that looks like, because it's not always going to be super easy. Community is a hard thing to manage when you're thinking about managing it towards the objectives that you have. Now, if you're just saying, hey, listen, our goal is to just bring 30 people to a conversation and have each one of them speak at least once over the course of an hour. Okay, great. That could be the objective, right? Another could be like, hey, listen, we just want to facilitate, conversation and dialogue. We want to get people into Slack. And if everyone once a month contributes something, or at least logs in Slacks or reads or engages, great. That's a win for us. That means that they're present, they're engaged, they're even if they're watching and reading, maybe not contributing, but they're getting their own value from it. So depends on what you do. You're going to want to just make sure that you've got a way to manage it, because you're going to have to be able to justify any investments you'll make long-term. And there's got to be a way to quantify that. So think back, what is the very clear objective? How does it serve you? How does it serve your community, your customers? And then what's the value for everybody? So please just make sure that you're tracking that. Now, obviously this feels like a very high level, like, of course, Kristi, yes, we would do this and this and this and that. But obviously there's a ton of things that you would need to break down underneath each of these. So if you had to envision, each of these would have a very clear checklist of like, great, here's what we have to do when we get to each of these stages in the process. But I will tell you, the first thing that I think would be the most important is figure out who's going to own this. We've had a lot of great ideas fail fast because lack of accountability and ownership, right? We all are so well-intended. We all want to do these things. I don't think that there's anybody I speak to who says, no, Kristi, we don't want to facilitate community. We don't want our customers talking. We don't want them getting value from one another. We don't want them to be friends. Nobody says that. But what happens is we have great ideas. We think about all the things we want to do, but because nobody takes ownership of it, it doesn't happen. And because for many of us, we're not hiring net new people, you're going to figure out who can own this in addition to what they might be doing today, which is tough, right? We all have so much on our plate. I don't think that there's one person I've ever spoken to who's just sitting around in a customer success role, in a capacity, working with customers saying, wow, I just really have a lot of time today. I really don't have much to do. Got to figure out something to fill it in. Nobody ever says that, right? So please take the time to figure out who has the bandwidth to own this. Maybe you shuffle some things around to give somebody the bandwidth, but find somebody who's going to be passionate about it and can commit to it and really own it, right? Make it theirs and lead it start to finish. Now, one more piece of advice I'll give you. If you are a leader and you are delegating this to somebody who's going to own it, empower them and give them the autonomy to lead it. Do not make them the person who is just tactically executing all the things you're telling them to do. When you're asking somebody in the organization to step up and take on something that is outside of the scope of the role they were hired to do, and then making them feel like they're being micromanaged or just doing the tactical work and don't really have the creative liberty to own it in its entirety, it really takes the joy out of it. So just be thoughtful about that. If you're going to empower somebody to do it, please go ahead, empower them to do it, give them the autonomy, give them the resources, give them the support, and cheer them on along the way. So please make sure that you've got a process outlined on how you're going to get from start to finish. Make sure, again, ownership is big, obviously communications, execution as well. Track the KPIs and figure out how you're measuring this over time. Now, I did tell you I was going to try to be cognizant of time this week because I feel like I really did you all wrong last week with the lack of time for Q&A. So I am watching the clock. I did make sure that we would have time this week. So what I will end with, which I always do, is community mistakes to avoid. Now, first thing is, don't talk about something, just do it. Again, I tell you, like, even myself, my team can attest to this. I have 1,000,001 great ideas all the time. Sometimes we just don't do them because we just move on to the next thing. If there is something that you know is going to have real impact on your customers and provide real value, don't talk about it, do it, start something. Right? This goes back to the fact I sent you all a link that I know clearly did not work. We'll get it to work. But we're looking for your feedback. we're going to start a community for you. We want to be able to facilitate a place where you can continue the conversations, go back and forth and ideate on what's working, what's not working. A lot of you over the past couple sessions of our boot camps have taken our decks, our templates and resources and gone out and used them on your own. I would love for you to have a place to come back and share your learnings and what worked and what didn't with other folks in the community. So be about something, right? Don't just talk about it, start it. The second thing, don't think big when getting started. Focus on connections. Now, I said it's really easy to think about community as like this huge, big initiative where all of your customers are actively participating, where you're bringing together people from all walks of life, all over the world, around one big cause, right? And the problem with that is that it feels so overwhelming that it's almost impossible to take on. So focus on the outcome, which is focusing on those connections. Don't think about the program. Don't think about how and what we're going to do and branding and logos and colors and all this stuff. Make that a secondary or tertiary thing that you're thinking about. Focus on what are the connections we want to make and how are those going to bring value to our customers and our community. So if you focus on that and make that your priority, you're going to be successful. The third point, there's no need to watch the discussion. Your customers are always talking. This goes back to fear. I bring this up again, which feels a little repetitive from earlier when I called out the fear thing, but really there's no need to watch the discussion. I think that there is this fear like, oh my gosh, one of our customers is going to say something and it's going to trigger this whole rippling effect, right? Like this one customer had a glitch in it or a bad experience, the product didn't work, or we weren't able to ingest their data the right way, or we didn't have the integration that they wanted, right? There's always going to be something, but you can't be afraid of that, right? Your customers are having these conversations, whether you see it, know it or not. And so please don't be committed to like watching every single conversation that's taking place. It's not necessary. Let the conversations happen organically. If you see it and there's something you can contribute, if there's something that you can lean into, great. But it's like the companies, I'm sure many of you shop on Amazon, rather, or shop on any other website where there's reviews. And oftentimes you'll see a customer will leave a review and the company might reply back with like, thank you so much for that feedback. Let us know what we could do, or right, there's something there. You can't be afraid of it, right? Like let the truth come out, just use it to your advantage, right? Use it as a good opportunity to intervene and learn. The next thing there is number 4, which is don't worry about healthy versus unhealthy customers. Again, kind of leading off of point 3 there, where no need to watch the discussion. This also talks about like, oh gosh, well, I don't want my unhealthy customers talking to my healthy customers. And this is where I said, but what if your healthy customers talk to your unhealthy customers, right? What if your customers who are getting a ton of value from the partnership today went and told all of your customers who aren't using the product as designed, as intended, and they had a new way of thinking about it, right? Just something they hadn't thought of before, something that really clicked for them, or because they have similar use cases, are able to solve and solution each other's problems. So you can't be afraid about what those conversations will be. You can't worry about only facilitating conversations with your good customers, your healthy customers, or your advocates, right? This is an environment for everybody, good, bad, or otherwise. And if you're going to go down the route of investing in community and believe that there's real value there in facilitating those conversations, do not overthink it. Just let it happen. And guess what? Yeah, some good will come out of it. Maybe some interesting learnings will come out of it as well. Number 5, this last point, don't forget to check back in to see how things are going. The worst thing you can do is that set it and forget it. And I talk about this with every single program you build and deploy, is you can't go out there and say, oh, well, great, check that box. I built that journey, I built that playbook, right? We've got this process in place without revisiting it. Now, I told you that probably about quarterly, at least every 6 months, we'll go back and do an overhaul or just kind of an assessment or a check-in on all of the processes we've built, reports that we're using, ways that we're managing the business to say, is what we're doing working? We'll also do check-ins with our customers. Hey, is what we're doing working? And so it's important to just make sure that you're checking back in with your team, right? Checking in on the data, check in with your customers, but get a sense of how things are going and find out ways to optimize. Now, I told you, if our plan is day 1, just go and do something, obviously you're going to have to come back and enhance it and optimize it and make it a little bit better. So that should automatically by design just be part of what you're doing. But it's easy to say, oh, well, we already did that thing and it seems to be humming, and so we're just going to like let it go. Don't forget to go back. please. Anything worth doing is worth doing well. And so I'm not saying you got to be perfect out the gate, but perfection should be something you strive for over time. Try to get as closer as possible. That's going to require you to revisit and really go back and optimize. So those are the 5 things. Please avoid making these mistakes. Do the things I've asked you to do. And I assure you that you will get some positive momentum out of the conversations, discussions, and relationships you're facilitating. So that said, that wraps up the presentation part of today. And I did allow for 13 minutes of Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing the presentation. I'm going to come on full screen here. I'm going to open up the Q&A. It looks like we've got a couple here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you haven't already, or I know that there was a couple of you that asked some questions in the chat. If you did, and I didn't address them in the presentation, I'm happy to answer them right now. I would just ask that you take your question, drop it into the Q&A, and I will get to it. So the first thing that was asked is, at what stage we build an advisory board? So when you have 10, 20, or 50 customers. That's a great question. You know, I think that it was going to wait until your company gets a little bit bigger, where you've got enough diversity in your customer base to bring together the right people. What I will tell you is that sometimes, especially if you're early in your journey, sometimes you just bring on customers. Now, what I mean by that is, like, all of those customers might not be your ideal fit, right? They might not be your ICP customers. Those might not be the customers that you want to build for into the future. And that's okay, right? Like, this happens. Oftentimes we bring in revenue because we're starting, right? We need to bring in revenue. So I think that when you're at a place and you only have a handful or a small number of customers, I'd encourage you to wait a little bit longer. I'm not going to say that there is a magic number that you should start here, but like, if I had to throw a number out there, I'm going to say, wait till you have at least 100 customers where you're going to be able to pull value from the conversations, learn from them, where you've got access to industry experts, right? So if you're doing a customer advisory board, you've got thought leaders that have immersive and extensive experience in the space that are going to bring a ton of value to you and your organization from a learning standpoint. Folks that have used your product, really integrate it into their workflows, have gotten a ton of value from it. Early stage companies, your product might still be in its early stages. So if you're thinking about creating a product advisory board, it might still be too early to get a lot of positive feedback on what the direction is, because you're probably still building towards that and you don't want to deviate from your initial roadmap. So I think there's a whole bunch of things you need to consider. I'd avoid starting too early, and probably, like I said, maybe when you have 100 customers plus, it's probably a good time to start thinking about seeding some of those ideas and concepts. So thank you for that question. Another question we have: for starting out an online community, are there best practices to seed content? Would you start with a smaller subset of customers or advocates so it's valuable from day one when it's opened up to all? Yes. So I love that idea. And it's something that I've done in the past. When we started our community, we wanted there to be a robust amount of conversations and just kind of engagement happening. And so we found our first 100 people that were part of our kind of community pilot or beta. And we kind of brought these advocates together and said, okay, like, here's what we're hoping to build. This is what we want it to be. This is how we envision it working. And we let their conversations go on for months, where we just watched like what the conversations were. What did they want to talk about? What did people pin? How did they engage? What's the type of content that resulted in sharing it? What got a lot of comments in conversation versus which got just like one comment or things like that. So we used the first couple months to really learn a lot about how our customers engaged and what was valuable, I think, long term. We then did some cleanup. We did create some repositories of content that was content from our brand and business. We also made sure it was very clear that there was pre-seeded content that was brand content that we were pushing out versus content that was coming from the community. We wanted to always make sure that we differentiated so that we weren't blurring the lines there. So I absolutely think that in terms of that, absolutely, it's fine and fair. Listen, if you don't have the bandwidth or time to do that, and you just want to open it up and let whatever happens happen, that's fine. We wanted to be more methodical about it. So when we initially launched our larger community, which did include a platform and a forum and a lot of things happening there, at that point we were making a big investment. We did manage it where we did about 6 months of just those conversations with that group of 100, and then we opened it up and we eventually had thousands of people participating in it actively. That community is still really thriving today. In terms of like what content we seeded, we tried to stay away from too much product stuff. That was what our knowledge base was for. So we didn't feel like we needed to replicate our knowledge base in the community forum. So we tried to gear it more towards thought leadership or use cases. So more like creative ways to use our platform that they might not have thought of. So that's what we started with when we were thinking about what was the content we wanted to live there, as far as the content that from a brand standpoint, we were putting in outside of our community attendees. So hopefully that was helpful there. Let's see, I think we can get to a couple more. Looks like there is, okay, there's a lot of questions on meetups. All right, so I'll just address that quickly. We do pick basically about a city a month. I think the next few that we've got coming up, I know that we've got San Francisco on there. I know that we've got LA on there. Atlanta is on there. I believe DC is on there as well. Miami is on that list. So more to come on all of these dates. But yeah, it's a little bit based on all of our travel schedule with industry events, as well as my availability, sorry. So I try to not do more than once a month just for the sake of my family. But yes, we do have more dates coming up. So like I said, LA, San Francisco, Atlanta, Miami, and more to come. So just sit tight. We'll be putting out dates and times on all of these, but we kind of do them as we find places to host. So we'll let you know as we get closer. Then we've got another question here. So any recommendations for an industry where there's customer confidentiality, even around being big customer, is a top priority? Ooh, that's a tricky one. I mean, honestly, you're facilitating community. If you're opening it up, you're asking them to opt into it. So if they have some concerns about participating in something because of anonymity or privacy or some policies there, I'm assuming that they wouldn't actively participate, or at least there would be some anonymity. Maybe you can create it where they don't use their full name. Maybe they're not required to use their company name, right? So there's probably a lot of settings that you can use and modify in some of the community forums and platforms, right? I know that when you create a profile, you enter in your name and an email address and your company, right? Like you're kind of preceding your profile information. I'm sure that there's ways that you can maybe make things not required or allow people to build some anonymity around that. So that's how I would think about it. If you really have a place where like it's just like there's so much privacy and security around it, like you can't connect people or companies, then maybe community is not the avenue for you. I don't know to the extent that the privacy and security policies you have in place, like what you can and can't do. So I don't want to advise you to do something that legally you can't, and then I get a whole heap of trouble. So I'm just gonna say, like, perhaps we could think creatively. If you want to message me offline, this is Gary. Gary, if you want to message me offline, happy to chat about that with you. Somebody else asked, what's the minimum number when creating a community? I don't think that there is a minimum number, right? Like I said earlier, this isn't a volume game. This is really about facilitating conversations, dialogues, and relationships between like-minded individuals. So community for you might be, hey, listen, we have a successful community because we have really great conversations and really strong relationships built between 50 people. And that's your community. And that if everyone there is getting value from it, your brand is getting value from it, that could be enough, right? Who's to say that there's a set number? I mean, heck, if you're a smaller company, we just talked about this, and I said, if you're starting with only 100 customers, let's say maybe if you had 100% of all of the companies participate and only one person from each company, at max, it would only be 100 people. And we know that 100% participation is not going to happen. So maybe 50% at best. Their entire community could only possibly maybe be 50 people. That's okay, right? If it's 50% of their customer base engaging and getting value and having those conversations, like that's enough. So I don't think that putting a number on it is the best way to measure it. Now, if you're a company like HubSpot, right, who has hundreds of thousands of customers, or Salesforce, right, they might be thinking and measuring community very differently, right? Like for them, it might be hundreds of thousands of people. And so maybe they have a different gauge of what success looks like when they're thinking about it from a volume standpoint, but I don't think that there's a set number. I think maybe you think about it through the lens of what percentage of our customers are engaged, what percentage of contacts or folks that we engage with at any individual company are engaged. So I would base it off of your customer base and build some ratios there to say like percentage of customer base would help indicate number and volume of participants in a community, and that would be helpful. All right, yeah, we've got some good conversations coming in, questions here. What role do you typically have your product team play in community, especially if you're trying to drive product improvements and enhancements? Is it too much to expect them to engage directly with the community? This depends. Like our product team at ClientSuccess is very engaged with our customer base. partly by design and partly by like, that's their passion, right? So our product team, like they want to engage with our customers. They want to hear what's working, what's not working. They want to build a product that's going to be widely adopted and where our customers are getting a lot of value. I think that there is a way to engage product organically, but also setting the right expectations. So what you don't want to have happen is that you create an environment where, again, your customers think that they have direct access to your product to make feature requests. You don't want that to be the case. But if you do have, let's just say a channel, let's just say we're using Slack, you could create a channel in Slack where maybe it's product feedback, or you're labeling it some way that sets the proper intentions, expectations. So I would say maybe create a Slack channel if you're using Slack and say, this is our product feedback channel. And you have somebody from product in there who goes and reads the feedback, comments, engages. Maybe then they reach out to people on one-on-one to learn more, or if they're building something or they release an enhancement, hey, did that meet your need? They can get some feedback on that. So I think that there's ways to do it where it feels right for both parties. You just don't want to have people kind of run with this and think that this forum is the appropriate one for them to go and make demands on product, because we also know that's not how product gets designed and developed, right? Most places are not custom dev shops, which means we're not all just building based off of what our customers are asking us to build. It has to fall into a roadmap. It's part of a bigger, grander plan. And so sometimes things fit in, sometimes we can make things fit in, but sometimes they don't. And so you just want to be very clear on expectations and engagement. I would also say probably for your product person, if you've got one person who's in there, just be careful about protecting them as individuals. I've seen a lot of people from product reach out and engage in community or directly with customers, and then the customers think that they have direct access to that person whenever something goes wrong or whenever they need something or they want something. And so it really, I think, can go sideways too if you're not managing that correctly. Sometimes create a product alias might be the best way, so you're not giving the product person a name that someone thinks that they can just reach out to anytime, that they're new best friends, but rather saying like, okay, this is just product at ClientSuccess, right? And that's the name that we use to engage and comment and participate in those conversations. Just again, create some anonymity there, protect your resources. All right, that's it. I know that I asked for questions and man, did you guys give them to me. So I apologize if I did not get to all the questions, but we are at the top of the hour. And I do want to be cognizant of that and to not run over. So I want to just start by thanking you all so much for your time and attention and engagement during today's session. As my next step and to do, as I mentioned, I will update that forum link that I asked you to fill out, which is basically asking you, where is the best place for us to continue our ClientSuccess Bootcamp community? We're going to give you 4 options, also a choice of other. If there's a better idea that you have than the 4 that we're proposing, please let us know so we can get started on that. I promise you, as soon as we get enough people to provide their feedback, we're just going to go and build and create a place for you to all network and share and continue these wonderful conversations. The other thing I'm going to do is make sure that as we get these dates and times for these next meetups up and available, I will let you all know. We are communicating them, so I try to update them on my LinkedIn profile. We do it on ClientSuccess as well. We will be having them on their website, so please, you can take a look there to see where we headed next. But I did shout out a bunch of cities. We're just trying to work through those dates, times, and locations. If you are in a location and want to host us, meaning you want ClientSuccess to come, you want to just offer up your location and allow us to host an event in your city, we're looking for folks to do that. So if you want us to come to your city and bring the community along with us, let us know. We can partner together to make that a reality. Our big thing is really trying to make sure that we're finding the right locations to host as many people as we do usually bring together. So thank you all again so much for your time. We'll see you back here next Tuesday, and really excited to continue the conversation. So thank you all so much. Take care.